Donald Trump is very sensitive to the idea that he does not want to seem like he's going to get played by Vladimir Putin in any sort of way, right? And so you've seen Trump in recent days kind of walk up to this summit talking about a number of things. One of them is he's kind of downplayed the chances of anything massive happen here, even as there have been, I think, hopes that there would be a pretty substantial breakthrough on the White House's side. But Trump has publicly sort of downplayed what may come out of this summit. Secondarily, there have been threats that if this doesn't go well, Trump has said he could know very quickly. He told Fox News, Brett Baer, on Air Force One headed to this summit, that he would be willing to walk away if it doesn't go well. And the White House has also sort of publicly mulled the idea that just as some of the restrictions on Russia and those affiliated with it, including India over oil buys, just as those could go down or away potentially if things go well, also there could be penalties if things ratchet up. So the White House is very sort of, I think, cognizant of those Helsinki memories, trying to make sure walking into this summit that the American president does not look like he's walking in, with some strategic disadvantage. They want him to be walking in as powerful as he possibly can be. Both something for domestic consumption, but also as a negotiating position against Vladimir Putin.
What specifically would we see out of the meeting in a best case scenario situation for Trump here, at least ending today? What would make him look really good and kind of quash those concerns that you had mentioned?
Well, I mean, look, this is an American president who has started counting up the number of conflicts around the world that he sees himself as having a role in having helped either stall or stop or pause or something like that. I mean, you're talking about Armenia and Azerbaijan. You're talking about Thailand and Cambodia. There's a fair number of things where Trump has had a role and to his credit has actually played a pretty decisive role. I'm thinking, in Thailand and Cambodia is a great example of this. Border skirmishes around the site of an ancient temple that's been contested for a long time, and Trump held up trade talks as a cudgel and basically said, look, you're not getting a trade deal as long as you two keep fighting about this. And he wound up, that was a very effective threat. Those two countries came to the table, inked a deal in Malaysia with Malaysia's prime minister looking on, facilitating that exchange. And then all three of those countries wound up with preferential reciprocal tariff rates as a result of that. So this is something where, this president has seen himself as the ultimate deal maker. He's always seen himself as the ultimate deal maker. He famously wrote The Art of the Deal. And so this is somebody who says, look, for me, and I think the president has been open about this. He wants to see himself with a Nobel Peace Prize. He'd love to see that as a possibility. So I think that's kind of on the plus side. That's where the best possible thing would be for the White House, of something that comes out that legitimizes all of that, where you really meaningfully shift the trajectory of Russia's war in Ukraine, right. Get a ceasefire, get meaningful concessions, something like that.
Well, we are, of course, awaiting President Trump to step off of Air Force One. Derek Wallbank is going to stay with us. He's Bloomberg News senior editor for U.S. economy and government out there on the West Coast. Again, awaiting the president. The plane has been on the ground now, I would say about 20, 30 minutes at this point, landing just after we started at the top of this hour. Again, there with quite an entourage in terms of his administration. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, Susie Wiles, White House Chief of Staff, and White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, among some of the key members of his team. A key member of our team, Anne-Marie Hordern, on the ground there in Anchorage, Alaska. Anne-Marie, we talked to you about 50 minutes ago at the top of the hour. What's the update here? We know the President, Trump, has landed. What do we know about President Putin at this point?
Yeah, President Trump has landed. He's in Anchorage. He is on Air Force One greeting with U.S. Senators Murkowski and Sullivan, as well as the governor of Alaska. The president will be holding on Air Force One until President Vladimir Putin arrives, according to the White House. So really the start of this process is all going to begin when Vladimir Putin touches down. He is en route to Alaska, of course, from Russia, but President Trump will just hold on the tarmac, will be on Air Force One with his team having meetings, as I mentioned, with the 2 U.S. senators from Alaska, as well as the governor, before Putin arrives. Once Putin does arrive, we did get a bit of an update on how the process is going to go. Originally, and we heard this from Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov, that it was going to be a one-on-one Putin-Trump meeting before they invited in their larger teams with the U.S. and Russian delegation. And Dmitry Peskov has said it will be about 6 to 7 hours of potential meetings between these delegations. We've now learned that President Trump will be joined by his Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio, as well his Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who has spent countless hours with Putin since Trump's back in the White House. He was the one who has been going over to Moscow and handling these meetings. So that takes a different tone to this meeting. The president's going to be flanked by the individuals who have been working on this crisis day in and day out. And then they will be joined by their larger delegation. So for President Trump, that'll be Secretary of State Scott Bessent, as well as Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, Chief of Staff, of course, Susie Wiles. We don't know who Putin's going to have with him on the 3-3. I imagine it'll be his long-term foreign secretary, of course, that's Sergei Lavrov, and his very long-term aide, who was the former Russian ambassador to the U.S., now Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov, who has been a part of all of these meetings, including the one that took place originally between the U.S. and Russian delegations in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Anne-Marie, 6 to 7 hours is quite a long time. And Trump had been signaling that it looked like he wanted to get this meeting kind of in and out very quickly.
6 to 7 hours sounds like a lot, but when you're dealing with translation and also an individual like Vladimir Putin, who sometimes likes to go down memory lane and give you a revisionist history, sometimes something that you think could take an hour or two discussion will take a lot longer and is more labor intensive. We should note on the Russian side, for them, even though obviously this has everything to do about Putin's invasion of Ukraine of February of 2022, for the Russians, they really see this as a restart of bilateral cooperations with Washington. You have the New START treaty that is going to be ending in February of 2026. They want to talk about arms control. They want to spend a great deal of time talking about sanctions. It's probably a reason why Putin is bringing his finance minister, Anton Siluanov, to these negotiations. And they want to talk about economic cooperation on some level, whether it's energy deals, rare earth. We are just south of the Arctic Circle. That's where all the rare earth magnets are. But for this White House, President Trump made it pretty clear, speaking to reporters on his way to Alaska. He said no business can be done until the war is unwound. So what kind of concessions is Putin really going to come here and willing to give? The best case scenario would be this would be the start of a diplomatic process that could get to that end destination where Zelensky and Putin can sit around a table and figure out how they are going to actually end this war, whether that's a ceasefire, an armistice, or a real peace negotiation.
You know, we should remind everyone that we are, of course, awaiting President Trump to deplane from Air Force One. What we have learned is that Russian President Vladimir Putin is in Alaska. He has touched ground there at the tarmac. We don't yet have pictures of it. For those who are watching on TV and YouTube and Bloomberg Originals, that is, of course, Air Force One. We know that President Trump is meeting with various local officials and members of Congress. In the meantime, I think it's interesting, Anne-Marie, you mentioned that this 3-on-3 meeting between President Putin and President Trump. Last time we talked about the meeting in Helsinki years ago, that there were no really record of the conversation between President Trump and President Putin. There will be adults in the room this time around.
So that they can get in nicely and don't have to try to
Well, he'll be joined by his staff and the individuals who are working on these topics at a more nuanced level. And I do think it takes on another level of seriousness, given the fact that he's going to be joined by Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff. And Steve Witkoff is the one who's been dealing directly with Vladimir Putin to get to this day, to get to this summit. So that is remarkably different than Helsinki. Of course, Helsinki, everyone remembers the press conference. The president really in Helsinki, and Fiona Hill, his top national security expert on Russia, was recently talking about this. The president really wanted to come out and talk about nuclear proliferation, an arms treaty, arms control, and the entire press conference, of course, was taken away when he stood next to Putin and said he tended to agree with him over his own intelligence services. President Trump is going to want to avoid that when he gets in the room with the press later this evening, and that's where all the press is right now, gathering as we wait for these two men to begin the start of their summit.
All right, so appreciate it. We know it's a busy day for you. Looking forward to your continued coverage over the next few hours. Anne-Marie Hordern, co-host of Bloomberg Surveillance there on the ground in Anchorage, Alaska. We should point out that the Russian news agency Interfax, as we said earlier, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has arrived in Alaska. We know President Trump is already there. We've been showing pictures, certainly, of Air Force One on the tarmac, open door. But again, the president is said to be right now greeting Senators Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan, and also Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy on Air Force One while he was awaiting for President Putin to arrive. Just awaiting the two leaders there on the tarmac. That looks like the Russian president, Putin's plane there. So they're on the ground. So we should anticipate that those two leaders will be together any moment. Want to go back to Derek Wallbank. Derek, just about 30 seconds. What are you going to be looking for as these two leaders deplane?
Well, I'm going to be looking for the very first things that you see. We may not even hear them initially, but let's watch those interactions, the very, very first one. Let's watch the warmth there. We know that Trump is a big fan of firm handshakes. So let's see those initial things that we get in there, those first verbal, nonverbal cues that we might get to kind of see where this relationship could go. We are bracing for potentially hours of talks, hours plural of talks, and we'll learn a lot after this. These could be very consequential conversations, but they're all going to start with those very first interactions. Remember, Trump did say he thinks he's going to have an idea early on how this is going to go. So I'm going to be watching early on what those interactions are, what sort of warmth we get there, what sort of, even nonverbal cues, because we're looking at tenor here as much as everything. The other thing that I'm going to be watching for is, the U.S. is ready. Right. It says if things don't go well.
Right.
So what do those things look like?